Christmas cards and in our carols and in our Christmas plays, poor Mary and Joseph can't find any place because everyone's all booked up. That's not what happened. How do you know that, Chip? Well, again, I was there, and I know they had a place to stay. No, that's not it. Look again at Luke chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. It says, while they were there, stop. There where? Bethlehem. The verse before it says that they traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem. It says, while they were there. They were already there. And they weren't wandering around like gypsies looking for a place to stay. They were there. It came time to deliver a child. She gave birth to her firstborn, wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. Aha, Chip, there you go. There's no place for them in the inn. That's where we get this idea of Las Posadas. Oh, again, we're reading our English translation and we're filtering it through our understanding, like Rose, of what we think we've understood about the Christmas message, because we've seen it in Christmas carols and plays and all this stuff since we were little kids, and of course this is how it was. Well, again, if we look at the Greek in this, the Greek word here is kataluma, which means guest room. It's the same word that's used to describe where the Last Supper was held in Luke 22:11. Kataluma, that's where it is right here. It says, and say to the owner of the house, to the teacher asked you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Same word, guest room, that is translated in Luke, no place for them, not in the inn, in the guest room. Which implies, where were they? In a family's home. They were in a home, which again connects better with Matthew's gospel, because they probably stayed there after the census, didn't go back to Nazareth for at least 2 years, because that's where the wise men met them. Same Greek word here for where the Last Supper was held is the same Greek word that is used here in Luke's gospel. Hold on. No place for them in the inn. It's a bad translation because it implies our common understanding of this, they couldn't find room in a hotel. No, there was no place for them in the guest room. That's a better translation of this because it's the same Greek word. See, our answers have been there. We've just been used to reading it in our English Common Understanding translation. So what are you trying to say, Chip? Well, what I'm saying is this. There's a different Greek word translated as in, like a hotel, and that word is pandokion, and that is actually used in Luke chapter 10. He went to him and bandaged his wound, having boiled oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn. Pandokion, right here. Different Greek word. This is the story of the Good Samaritan. So the Samaritan brings the battered man, pours oil and wine, bandages his wound, and takes him to a hotel. Got it? Different Greek word, not a guest room. So where were Mary and Joseph? In a guest room. They weren't in a hotel. They didn't have to plan ahead. They weren't wandering around like gypsies. They were at a relative's home, and they were already there. This didn't happen by surprise. Get it? Well then, if they were in a home, where does this idea that they were in a stable come from? Well, that's a good question. When you look at this, she gave birth and wrapped him in bands and laid him in a manger. That's how we know that they were in a stable. A manger is a feeding trough for animals. Feeding trough for animals. Because there was no place for them in the guest room. The place was so crowded, she didn't have any privacy to give birth. You see, giving birth for a woman is a very personal, private matter. You don't want everyone in the whole house watching you give birth. I mean, that's just rude. You know what I mean? See, people back then had sensibilities about these things, and they wanted to protect her integrity. This is also why I say Joseph wasn't there. Why? Because it was a very private thing, and men weren't involved in giving birth back then. They just weren't. Even in our modern times, you watch I Love Lucy episodes, right? When Lucy gives birth, where is Ricky? He's in the waiting room smoking cigarettes. They don't even allow him into the delivery room back then. And that was the 1950s. You see what I'm saying? In Jesus' day, this was a sacred time that had nothing to do with men. Women were all involved with this. Who probably helped Mary give birth? One of her cousins, one of these relatives, that was a midwife. That's who probably helped her. Then after Jesus was born, someone got Joseph and said, come on and see your baby. That's probably how it was. Why in a stable? Because the place was full. There was no room in the guest house. See how that makes more sense? So they weren't frustrated, and there wasn't the benevolent innkeeper who said, yeah, take the stable and give birth there, lady. No. I mean, it's a cute story, but it doesn't fit our gospel records. We're not reading the Gospels accurately. It's just that simple. Okay, I'm going to close a lot of this, including the Golden Girls. Okay? So, now that I've completely destroyed Christmas for you, let's put this all together, shall we? What happened that first Christmas? What really happened? Right? In 8 BC, the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus calls for a census for taxation. Okay. On July 17th, 7 BC, the angel Gabriel appears to Mary that she is to be the mother of the Messiah. The word of the Roman census hits Israel around late winter, early spring of 6 BC. I'm estimating between February and March. They finally get the word to be taxed. Because you got to remember, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have teletype. They didn't have faxes. No internet. Everything is done by carrier. And the Roman Empire is huge at this time. So the trickle-down effect took some time. Okay? Joseph takes Mary to Bethlehem to be enrolled. She is about 7 or 8 months pregnant around this time. So they got to go. They come to a relative's home, but it is packed with other kinfolk who are also enrolling at this time. On April 17th, 6 BC, Mary gives birth. She has to go outside to a cave with the animals because all the rooms in the house are full. No room in the inn. She and a couple of midwife relatives go with her. She gives birth relatively easily. Remember we talked about that last week with the Immaculate Conception? It's probably a very easy birth, minimal pain. Mary wraps Jesus, lays him in the feeding trough there, and the midwives go and tell Joseph he's got a son. At the same time that this is happening, the astrologers in Persia, the wise men, notice an unusually bright conjunction of stars. They surmise it is a sign of the birth of a king of the Jews. They know this by the zodiacal arrangement of the stars and the records the Jews left in Babylon and Persia during their exile. Simultaneously in Bethlehem, shepherds in the neighboring fields are greeted by a chorus of angels heralding Jesus' birth. They go immediately and see him wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in the feeding trough with Mary and Joseph. See how this is all coming together? Mary and Joseph decide to stay in Bethlehem for some time after the enrollment. So they've been enrolled, and they stay there about a year or two. Other relatives return to their homes, but they stay there. Okay? About 2 years' time, around 3 or 4 BC, the wise men from Persia arrive in Jerusalem and inquire about this new birth. Herod doesn't know what they're talking about. They tell of the star they saw a couple of years ago. And the wise men figure out that the king was to be born in Bethlehem. They leave and find the house where Mary is staying. I love this picture. This is probably what really happened. Notice this? You see this? 2-year-old Jesus and Mary, and these are the kings. And where are they? In a house. Just like this is probably what happened. And they give him presents of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And what is Mary and Joseph going to do with this money? Put it in Jesus' college fund, right? They got to leave for Egypt because Herod goes nuts. And he orders the what? 2 years old and under to be killed. That makes no sense unless Jesus himself was at least 2 years old. And again, this fits with what Luke and Matthew's gospel have been telling us. They use the gold, leave Bethlehem for Egypt, settle there until Herod dies. A year or so later, that they finally hear about that. Eventually, they return, settle in Nazareth, and that's where Jesus grows up. That's the first Christmas. And he was born on April 17th, along with someone else we all know and love.
Chip's birthday.
Jesus was born on my birthday. I'm so happy. Yes.
I got the month and the year, but I didn't quite get the day, the 17th.
April 17th, 6 BC.
Why did you arrive?
Because that's when the star appeared. That's when the conjunction of stars came together.
So that was written.
Yes.
The 17th.
Yes. We can calculate this by looking at the position of the stars at that time, and it fits best then. Yep.
That was from the astrologer?
From the astrologer.
It was not.
No, it lasted over a period of time, but that's when it was on that day that it all comes together, because the planets and stars are in constant motion. Okay? So there was a movement towards that, but when this conjunction means where one or more stars come together at once. And it was at that precise time that we can calculate, based on our calendar, would be April 17th, 6 BC. Yes?
Just clarification, Jim. When you said that Jesus was born on April 17th, 6 BC, BC stands for before Christ.
That's correct.
So why do you call
Why isn't that just year 0? Because when our calendar was set at the time that it was presumed that this was the period in which Jesus was born, to demarcate before he was born and after he was born. When we look at the records of those people back then, we realize that they were off by a number of facts. So when we keep the calendar as we understand it now and look back when all of these events occurred, this is when Jesus was born, actually. Well, he was born before he was born.
So we are year 2023 now, plus 4.
Yes, you could say that. We're about 6 years off.
Oh, 6 years.
6 years off.
2025.
Yeah,
Kind of interesting.
it is.
It's the mystery of our faith.
So we will say Merry Christmas on April 17th.
Yes, we say Merry Christmas on April 17th because that's most likely the real time that Jesus was born. And the thing that I forgot to bring is recently Catholic Answers had an article written by Jimmy Akins where he goes over the possible dates. And one of them that he points out, he says there's multiple possibilities, but one of them is April 17th, 6 BC. So even Catholic Answers agrees with my birthday. I mean, Jesus' birthday. Okay. By the way, another fact, Jesus, based on the Shroud of Turin, was approximately 5'11".
That's your height, Steve?
Somebody in this room is also 5'11".
You should
I'm not saying who it is, but there's too many coincidences going on. If you see me walking across the lake, don't be afraid. It's just me, just saying.
You won't be crucified.
No, I won't.
So why do Romans decide to do it on December?
Again, this comes by tradition.
They base it on Epiphany.
That's part of it, but also the traditional time in which